right. Hello, everyone. This is week 3, so we're now into real material. Forgot to put my title up here, but basically what's going on is chapter 1 is finished, and there's a mock quiz being done on the last part of the introduction and the full length of chapter 1. Chapter 1 sort of is a broad overview of all the things that happened before the Norman conquest, which is usually regarded as the most important event in the history of the United Kingdom. So we're going to talk about that today. We'll just call this lecture Week 4, the Normans. So who are the Normans? All right, we just spent our time talking about Vikings, so I'm not going to remind you and rehearse all the stuff we talked about Vikings or said about Vikings, but basically Vikings were pagan people who came from the north, from Sweden, especially Norway and Denmark, but increasingly Sweden too. Germania, which is where Germany comes from, the name. Lots of things you'll learn in this course will probably let you know where the name comes from. You know, just like Korea comes from Goryeo and other things in Korean language. They go back to ancient historical periods or names or places. So the same thing, England is England, and Great Britain is Britannia, and so on. There are Viking raids all over the place. A lot of the Vikings end up staying. So northern Scotland still has Viking kingdoms for hundreds and hundreds of years. But after Alfred and his sons, his successors, consolidate, the 7 kingdoms of England into a sort of a southern English nation. Some people call it the first nation in the world. I don't know if that's debatable, but that's, by some definitions, it is. It's one group of people that identify themselves as the English. They call themselves Anglo-Saxons sometimes, but that's really like a sort of retrieval of an ancient sort of ethnical or racial designation. You're English. If you lived in the southern half of the Isle called Britain, then you were English. The middle and northern part of what is now England was ruled by the Danes, Vikings mostly, but they were sort of intermingling with the English. So the Danelaw, that big strip that you saw on the slide that I showed you, that middle part that used to be Northumbria and Mercia, those northern kingdoms were under Viking control for a long time. Why did it not become, a Viking kingdom, completely a stable, permanent kingdom? There's lots of reasons for that, but the institutions, the Christian institutions and the political and legal institutions that the English had, once the Viking people started intermingling and living in those areas, trading and getting married and growing, raising children in those areas, they found that actually the lifestyle and the society of the English was preferable to being, I guess I'm stereotyping again, but a dangerous, hunter, raider, pirate, Viking, berserker who was, ultimately going to die somewhere along the line, trying to accumulate enough wealth to maintain a kingdom or followers. They used to call these people sea kings. So this Viking age starts to end. Canute is really the greatest, perhaps, of some of the Viking kings, but after him in Northern Europe, it starts to diminish, except some of these Vikings are successful in securing areas permanently. So Northern England still is, and Northern Scotland in general, Ireland itself, they're under heavy influence of Vikings for hundreds of years, but they gradually start to absorb the Vikings that are there. And the Vikings that moved to Iceland and the Vikings that spread down around Europe, they spread themselves so thinly that they sort of get integrated into different places. However, in Normandy, in northern France, it's not the case. They become the Norman people, which is a name that's derived from Norseman, Norway, Norseman, Norman. They are so difficult to deal with that the King of France basically says, okay, you can have this part of my kingdom. You can rule over this. We'll call this the Duchy of Normandy, and you guys can be the Dukes of Normandy, but you owe your allegiance to me. I'm the king, you're beneath me, but this is your territory. So these Dukes of Normandy are converted to Christianity. That's another one of the rules they have to follow. But they're not peaceful Christian people. They are essentially converted Vikings. So I like to call them French Vikings, but that's probably not a good description. Basically, they're very good warriors. They become more organized. They start adopting, horseback riding and attacking with swords and lances and spears. They start building castles, and they start to, become as powerful as, in some cases, the kings of France. There's the Duke of Burgundy, who's also very powerful. So France is not like one, it's not a nation the way you think of it now. And France really doesn't get consolidated into this national entity that's very patriotic and unified, really until the French Revolution and Napoleon really pulls all the French, like almost like using his personal gravity and his political ideas to pull them into like an entire country governed by Paris. Louis XIV has a lot to do with this because he also moves the court to Versailles, and everybody who's important has to go there. So this has not happened with France. France is kind of broken into these big, powerful kingdoms and duchies. When Edward the Confessor dies, he's going to die. And in 1066, there's a lot of rumors about what happened. I don't want to get into it too much, but there was a very powerful family that Edward the Confessor didn't really get along with. His name was Godwinson, and he was an earl, and his sons were very powerful too. So when his sons grew up, they also became earls. So they were controlling the country, but Edward didn't get along with them, so he exiled the Godwinsons, but they were powerful enough that they could return. So that's not something I'm going to test you on, but something you should know is that Harry Godwinson became the king, but he's not the son of Harry. Harry is not the son of Edward. Edward dies with no kids, like Queen Elizabeth will, except for he supposedly, when he's dying, names Harry his successor. But lots of people are not happy about this. William is actually related to the Anglo-Saxons through his mother, several generations back. It's like his great aunt was married to the King of England. So he has a very small claim to the throne, but he claims that, and I'll show you the Bayeux tapestry in class because I can't put it in my book due to copyright infringement, but it's a beautiful, it's a 1,000-year-old piece of cloth where they wove the Battle of Hastings onto it. It's called the Bayeux tapestry, and it's got some very interesting things on it. Basically, Harry goes on an adventure when he's younger, before he's king, and he sort of gets shipwrecked in Normandy, and William saves him, and rather than capturing him and demanding some sort of compensation, some sort of ransom from his family, he just keeps him safe, but he makes him promise that if Edward dies, because William actually is distantly related to Edward, makes him promise that he should be the successor of the English throne. So that's the story. Harry denied it. Harry was there when Edward died, so they made him the king. Immediately after he became the king, this is sort of a 100 days or 300 days thing, his own brother, whose name is Tostig, goes north and meets up with a Viking king named Harald Hardrada. Sorry, there's a lot of Haralds. But the Viking king and him join forces, and they attack northern England. So Harry quickly, he's fighting his own brother and Vikings here, gathers an army, marches north as fast as he can. They take over York, and they basically celebrate, get drunk, take off their armor, and lay down. And they're not prepared when Harry does this very, very fast march with his military. They catch them by surprise, and they basically wipe out all the Vikings because they're all drunk, sick, injured, laying all over the place, not ready to fight. Some of them fight, but they wipe them out. He returns down to London. His army is exhausted from fighting the battle, but it's an amazing feat of logistics and tactics and strategy. So people are thinking, oh, maybe this king's not going to be so bad. And then, from Normandy, from France, William has been cooking up this plan to get the throne back, even though Harold's already claimed it, that he feels he's cheated for it. So first of all, he goes to the Pope and gets the Pope's blessing. So this is like basically the Catholic Church is on his side, that he should take England back. And England has sort of had influence from Irish bishops and their own bishops, and they've not necessarily followed the Catholic Church very closely, and they've defied the Pope sometimes, and basically William says, don't worry, I'm going to go in there, I'm going to take over the country, I'm going to fix the religious system, I'm going to put in some new bishops, I'm Christian, support me and help me raise some men, and I'll take over England, and you won't have to worry about England's loyalty anymore. So it's actually kind of a crusade against another Christian people, which really isn't supposed to happen, but it does. So he gathers as many men from Normandy as he can, but some of them are from Brittany. The people that live in Brittany, some of them are the ones that the Anglo-Saxons and Vikings chased away. They're actually Britons, right? Brittany has a Gaelic language. It's sort of almost gone now, but all the Celtic people went west, even in France. So these people from Brittany, they're thinking that that's where their ancestors were from. We're going to get a piece of this action too. So there's a whole big group, mostly Normans, some Britons, and some people from the Netherlands, Belgium, and Germany too. They can't get across the English Channel because the weather is bad. But as soon as Harold comes back and he says, okay, everybody go back to your farms, everybody go back to your work, the danger is gone. A couple weeks later, not even a couple weeks later, not long after, the wind changes, and all of a sudden it's not very far. So they jump in their boats, they go across the English Channel, and William is in England. He's in Kent. So Harold has to send out messengers, bring back his army, which is still injured, tired, exhausted, not recovered completely. And he, rather than some people think he should have stayed in London and just waited, he decides he's going to do another lightning attack. He goes right at William. They have a battle at the Battle of Hastings in 1066, where Harold supposedly is killed in the battle. In the Bayeux Tapestry, there's a guy who looks like a king, and he's got an arrow in his eye. I won't talk about how the battle went, but it looked like the Anglo-Saxons were winning, but then the battle went back and forth, and when the English charged, thinking that they would win, then the Norman cavalry came in on their horses and ran them down. And it was a very bloody battle, but not a huge battle compared to what you think. Something like 10,000 soldiers against 10. But William wins, and he makes his way slowly towards London, securing support along the way, and he gets crowned the King of England at Christmas. Okay, so there's your story. That's William the Conqueror. Another interesting thing about the Conqueror, and we do have Friday to talk about this, so I'm not going to go overboard because hopefully you'll have some questions, but we'll talk about him as a person too. But William the Conqueror grew up, he was not the son of the Duke. He was the son of the Duke, but his mother was not a duchess. His mother was a maid who perhaps was charming and attractive and intelligent, but he wasn't born from a legitimate marriage. So technically he was a bastard and he wasn't supposed to be Duke. But through his own cleverness, ability, charisma, strength, toughness, and so on, he became the Duke, and then he became a very effective leader, and was very effective on the battlefields. I'm not sure if he ever lost a battle. I don't know the statistics on that, but I've never heard of him ever losing a battle. So he becomes the King of England, and at first he thinks, you know what, I'm going to try and learn this country is run very well. The communities are organized. They have their own sheriffs. They have their own shires. The tax collection, everything's fine. But they don't want to be ruled by French people, and he has to reward all these knights and soldiers that came with him. So he starts giving away land and everything, and people are not happy about it. So he simply declares that I'm the king, I'm the leader, I conquered this land, all of Britain is mine. I'm going to keep 30% for myself, I'm going to keep 30% for my followers, and 30% for the church, and 10% left over for the English. That's not something you want to hear if you're a wealthy aristocrat in England and you have a lot of money. You want to feel like everything you have has just been given away. So to this day, if you have a Norman French type name in English, the average wealth of those people still is higher. And we're talking 1,000 years later, and those family names have still it just shows how profound that not that the entire country changed completely, but that the imprint, the reorganization of society, and the names and the language never have evolved, but the evidence, archaeological evidence remains in their language and in their society. You don't even have to dig a bone out of the ground or find a house to prove something. You can just say, well, where did this word come from? Why does this person who has $10 million have this name and somebody who's living on the street has none? These are things that are not coincidence. They're the result of social change, revolution, and evolution, just like the book says. So what happens is he tries to learn English and everything, but none of the people around him, none of the people he trusts speak English. They all speak French. And he has to keep dealing with revolts. They're rebelling here, rebelling there. London is pretty much under his control, but up in York, over in Manchester, Brighton, Coventry, to the west, cities to the west, they're not behaving. They don't want any of this foreign French-speaking Viking king as their leader. So he gets fed up with it. He gives up speaking English. All the court, all of the manners, all of the conversation, all of the records are all done in French. The church uses Latin. Very educated people still study Greek. The language of English becomes the language of the people. 90% of the people, at least, or more, speak English. But if you want to be upper class, you want to own something, you want to have a business, you want to be a diplomat, even if you want to fight in the English military and be an officer, you've got to be able to communicate in French. So French becomes the prestige language that everybody needs to know. And that's why so many French words have made it into the English vernacular, because even if you weren't one of those, hotshot, wealthy, top, upper class guys, if you were close, you were in the middle, if you had passable French or you could understand French, then that would be helpful. But as far as what people were doing in the villages and even writing in places, English continued to exist. It was never stamped out by any means. It's just all official business was done in French, right? Which made it difficult for the peasants to defend themselves in disputes. But basically, it wouldn't be, for another 150 years until things we would refer to as kind of basic human rights and political rights and legal procedures would start to be enforced by law, and we'll talk about the Magna Carta in a subsequent lecture there. So what the Normans end up doing, there's so many castles in England, partly because some of the most beautiful castles in Italy and Germany and France have been bombed, but the castles in the countryside were not targets for the German military. They bombed London. So all these, castles in Scotland, Northern England, Western England, they're still there. A lot of them are very squarish and simple, and it's more of a fort. It's not really a castle. It's in the textbook on page 67. And you can see what this is really, it's not so much a fort built to defend a territory. It's a fort built to police an area. So these periodic revolts were headaches and and disruptive to all kinds of social and economic life in England. So after about a decade of dealing with this stuff, William the Conqueror got his army together, went across the countryside into northern England, burning, killing, destroying everything they could. Sort of, I don't think there's any Mongolian students in our class, but sort of the way the Mongolian Empire did when Genghis Khan went somewhere. If somebody decided that they were going to cause trouble, he was going to put an end to it. And when he put an end to it, and he said, give you a choice. You want peace and you want to give us some tax and some tribute and behave yourselves. You can keep your lives in your city, but you're going to have to pay us a lot of money. If you don't, we're going to just steamroll the whole thing. There's going to be nothing left. Not even cats and dogs are even going to be on the street. So this is the kind of thing that he did. It's called the Harrying of the North. And this devastation was so complete that when they did the Doomsday Book, when they took the record of how many people lived everywhere and how much land and how much property, how many livestock, how many animals, how much wealth they generated, how many windows they had. They counted all these things, and it's a great resource for historians. When they did the censor of the whole island, they got an idea of how much wealth the island had and how much they could tax, and they also, found out that a generation later or 2 generations later, these areas were still poor and sort of underdeveloped because of the destruction that was caused. So I guess he had some patience at first, but then gradually built himself into sort of retribution, a mood of retribution, where he was going to punish everybody in the north for not accepting him as their liege. He made it so that before there was usually you had to swear allegiance to your lord. So there was a whole bunch of relationships between knights and lords and stuff, and it kind of went like this, where you have to do what your boss says, but you have no direct allegiance to the one above him. So he has to respect him and he has to respect him. But basically, William decided this causes problems, because if this guy doesn't listen to me and he takes his army here, this guy takes his army here, I'm going to end up with a whole bunch of people that are not necessarily directly loyal to me. Just because I control the top level doesn't mean I can't, have to deal with these local groups, or these earls or dukes who have their own armies, and they do. So what he says is that everybody in the kingdom has to swear to follow the king. You have to swear allegiance to him personally. So your first duty is to the king, not to your local landlord, not to the baron, not to the duke, not to the earl, and so on, not to the count. You have to swear allegiance to him himself. This will become a problem for certain people later, like Henry VIII, when he's trying to get everybody to say that they swear allegiance to him only and not to the Catholic Church or not to God. But this is a sort of absolute monarchy system almost. William really, in some sense, people debate about this, but in some sense he sort of took away some of the Anglo-Saxon and, dare I say, the Celtic idea of individual freedom and gender equality and stuff like that. It's the man is the head of the household. The king is the head of everything, right? You don't have any ability to disobey the king's orders. Again, when we get to 1215, the Magna Carta comes along. You have a king who's abusing that ability, and then they start to put in laws that limit and prevent the king's power. But more than any other king that I can think of, more than Henry VIII, really, or anybody else, William has the soldiers. He's a general. He's conquered the island. He's killed and scared away all of the people that would oppose him, and so the entire upper class is replaced by people directly loyal to him. He spends most of his time in maybe that's one of the reasons there's lots of rebellions. But he spends most of his time in Normandy, and lots of kings in the next 100 or 200 years will do that. They speak French first. That's their first language. They speak English too later. But it will be a while before there's a native English speaker who speaks English first, and even longer before there's a king that speaks English first and his French isn't as good. It's not fluent. It's not bilingual. That takes hundreds of years. So he spends a lot of time in Normandy. It seems like whenever he's in England, there's trouble in Normandy, so he goes over there. And whenever there's trouble in England, whenever Normandy calms down, that something happens in England. So he gets pretty frustrated about that, and he takes it out by killing a lot of people. We'll talk about the Normans in more detail. We'll go through the chapter and see how far we get on Friday. But just remember, these castles they function more like police stations, because basically what he wants to do is he wants forts everywhere, and he can put a few soldiers there. It's very, very difficult to take a fort, even with 100 people, if you don't have the right kind of equipment. So they don't have ropes and catapults and machines and hot oil to fire at them. They don't have lots of arrows or stones. These peasants are just kind of come and bang on the walls with their hands and their sticks. And a few people with bows and arrows, like 10 people inside that fort, they can just throw stuff and shoot arrows at them until they go away. If it gets too big, then the army comes from a larger fort or from a local city, and then the peasants are in big trouble because they're probably going to get their houses smashed, and some of them are going to get killed. They're going to get thrown in jail. So that's the castle. There is not really some people, for obvious reasons, they think, oh, castles are built on the edge of your kingdom to make sure another kingdom doesn't invade you. But these small, squat, square Norman castles, sometimes they're motte and bailey's, but this is a Norman castle, made of stone, very squarish. It's built to hold a small garrison, and if that garrison is in trouble because of local problems, then they will get reinforced by more soldiers. So you can find these like smaller castles. They're not palaces. They're not made to be comfortable. These square castles are across England in strategic places that overlook villages. They can basically project power in about across an area 10 or 15 kilometers in a radius. So it's just like a police station. You just have a zone around there that gets policed by the soldiers, by the guards that are in the Norman castle, and that makes sure everybody behaves and pays their taxes and swears allegiance, keeps their promises to their king. Okay? Now you have a quiz today. There'll be questions, and this is a larger chapter, but we're probably going to end up having one more, before Chuseok, having one more lecture like this. I'll split them into sort of 30 or 40 minute bite-sized pieces rather than trying to do the whole thing. But from here, we got to talk about the Magna Carta, and we got to talk about a bunch of things. The Black Death will probably be its own lecture, but we'll see how it goes. I hope you didn't do too badly on the quiz, but remember, it's a mock quiz, so it's just practice. Learn from your mistakes, and if there's technical errors, we'll work that out later. I'll see you on Friday, and have a good week.